As I mentioned, my name is Sarika. It is humbling to have been invited to speak at this place today. Anivarku Vanakkam, good evening. My name is Sarika Navanathan, and it is very humbling to be invited to speak today. This book by Suren Karthikesu is really an important contribution to the wide array of documentation efforts by Tamil people about the Tamil genocide. It's a very, very important piece of literature that we now have. Glad to also hear there's efforts to translate it into English so that it'll be available to an audience beyond the Tamil community. So it is an honor to be here and to partake in this book release with community. As Lankathas mentioned, I have been asked to speak in English today, and the topic that I've been given to speak about is the importance of documentation, and particularly the documentation of Tamil genocide, the history of what has happened to our community, and what efforts are happening in Ulam and also in diaspora, because as we know, we have many diasporas around the world that are engaging in their own different tactics and their own initiatives. Documentation is a huge topic, and I was given a very vague I was given free rein about what I could talk about today. And truly, to talk about documentation, I think it's maybe a course, it's a conversation that could go on for years, and there's so many elements to it. So how I thought I would narrow my conversation today is to speak about some of the experiences that I have had in my, I'll say comparatively very short career and experience as a volunteer in the Tamil community, as a law student, and as someone who wants to be active in the community and wants to continue contributing to these efforts to recognize genocide and hold those people who perpetrated against our community accountable for what they did. So in that sense, I tried very hard to think about how I could organize my thoughts about documentation, because documentation can mean a lot of things and takes a lot of different forms. But thinking about the work that I have done as a volunteer in Pearl, thinking about the work that I've done just being involved in the community, and thinking about the things that I've gotten to work on as a law student, I thought I would focus in a little bit more about legal documentation, advocacy-oriented documentation, and really, at the core of it, the importance of the Tamil community in those documentation efforts, and why it's so important that the work that's occurring on an international level is rooted in the Tamil community and actually comes from the Tamil community. So with that, I think I'll start off maybe by speaking about what legal documentation means to me. I'm a lawyer by education, and law school is unfathomable in a lot of ways to a lot of people, and it's because everything that we study and everything that we do is rules-based, very nitpicky, very specific. Words have specific meanings, and when we say something or we argue something, it has to be backed up in a very specific way. So when you think about the legal documentation of something like the genocide, personally, as a Tamil person, whenever I have done research on topics of Tamil genocide or tried to articulate the thoughts and the things that I know to be true because of my experience in the community, but to put that in a legal context, I've personally had, I felt very conflicted, and I found it to be a very hard task for me, because there are such narrow definitions and very specific definitions of what is an act of genocide, and what does this term mean? What does that term mean? What actions consist of that? What evidence do we have of that? Coming from a community background, these are stories that all of us in this room and all of us in the community know to be true. They're things that we can all speak to. But we run into trouble sometimes when we have to fit that into a narrow legal frame. And something that's helped me come to terms with that actually is the work that a lot of Tamil advocacy organizations do, both in Canada and around the world, and in Ulam as well. The organization that I will speak to due to my experience with them is PEARL, which is People for Equality and Relief in Lanka. PEARL is an organization that started out in the US 20 years ago, and today there are members all over the world that do advocacy work and research work, both based in different diaspora countries, so that includes the US, Canada, Europe, different countries there. But we do that work in collaboration with activists who are doing this work on the ground and are able to give us research, right? I would recommend that everyone go check out Pearl's. This is not a plug by any chance, but I think it demonstrates what I mean when I say there's a way to talk about these issues in a legal way. Pearl has publicly available reports. They've been doing advocacy work for about 20 years, and for a good portion of that 20 years, they've also been doing a lot of research and putting out research reports. And I can say, having seen these reports and having seen the behind the scenes of how these reports come to life, they take a lot of time, and they take a lot of expertise and specific research and things that, again, might feel very nitpicky and very specific coming from a community perspective. But when you look at it as a legal report or making a legal case, you realize how much effort has to go into every sentence that you say, every word that you use. And Pearl does a great job of putting these reports out, and has put out reports on several topics, including sexual violence and torture during the war, the ongoing, what Pearl refers to as the singalization of Sri Lanka, which is this appropriation of Tamil lands by the Sri Lankan government and Sri Lankan actors, and this changing of the land's history to suit a singularitist narrative, right? Reports about the legal case for genocide in the late stages of the war in 2008, 2009. Things like that. These are all detailed reports that are publicly available on Pearl's website, and I think they underscore they underscore the need for this kind of legal research. But I think a reason that we're able to be so effective in our work is because that work still comes from the Tamil community, right? It is work that is done in collaboration with activists in Ulam and is guided by their direction and what it is that they want. And it's done by Tamil people around the world. Yes, it's other papers are cited to, I think my reports are cited to, but if you were to compare a legal briefing done by Pearl compared to maybe a UN report or a news report, there is a clear difference in that. And I think that comes from the intention, the community, the intention that the Tamil community has when it comes to this kind of work, right? This is another thing that I have ran into when I was in law school myself. In my second year of law school, this is actually also fitting for the day itself today because it's the International Day of the Disappeared. In second year, I sought out to write a paper for one of my international law classes about the Tamil families of the disappeared. I'm sure most people in the room know, but enforced disappearances in Sri Lanka have been an issue for decades, and the government has not provided any answers or taken any steps towards accountability. And people are still missing. People we don't have answers for what has happened to thousands and thousands of people for decades. And I took basically, at the time, I mean, it continues now, but I took in focus for my paper the Association of the Relatives of the Enforced Disappearances. So this is a network of mostly Tamil women in the homelands. It's ammas, patis, sisters, aunts of people who have been forcibly disappeared over the years during the conflict. And they had decided in 2017 to stage a continuous protest against the Sri Lankan government. The Sri Lankan government at that time, and for many, many decades before, continues to push these commissions onto people, right? They say, okay, we're investigating it, we're gonna investigate it. Give us all your documents, give us everything that you have about whoever is missing. We'll find them for you, we'll give you an answer. It's been decades and we don't have answers yet. So these women decided to stage a continuous protest for, it started in 2017 and it's continuing until today. So all across the North and East, they've been protesting, and I wanted to write a paper about that. And I really struggled with writing the paper, to be honest, because when I was looking at what would be considered a credible source for a Canadian law school paper, a lot of the stories seemed to be missing. It seemed to be devoid of this context that, again, I knew existed in the community. It's something I'm familiar with because this is the community I come from. But it was, I guess in a sense, to be maybe because these are neutral sources or legal sources or coming from other bodies. It felt like a lot of the story was really missing. And where I actually ended up finding a lot of value, even to write this paper, was Tamil letter archives. It was videos people had taken at protests that these ammas were doing, or videos of these ammas speaking at the UN, or speaking about why they had showed up at the UN Human Rights Commission to speak about this, right? Or it was news articles in outlets like Tamil Guardian, where it's a Tamil person reporting on the Tamil issue, and they're able to give that context, right? And I think that already showed me that, these Tamil sources are so important to us, and that type of documentation we take for granted a lot, right? I don't know if it's like that. I definitely don't, but they're just Twitter accounts we follow, or their Instagram accounts we follow. They might be YouTube videos that we see, but it is information that's coming to us from the people that are being impacted, right? And it's from our own people, and we're able to, it's on us then to take that information and figure out how we bring that into different formats, right? And that year itself, I then had the opportunity to spend a month and a half of my summer in and around the northern province of Vietnam, and actually work with the mothers of the disappeared to then write them an advocacy report. And again, we ran into the same issue where these ammas were doing amazing work, right? It's not easy to organize an ongoing protest where every day there's a different action happening and you're getting people out and you're organizing them and you're showing up at meetings, you're showing up at people's houses. Like, that's not work that should be discounted at all, and it's done with such little resources by people who just want answers for their family members, right? Yet, there was this missing gap that the ammas had identified, and they had reached out to other civil society people to find someone who could do it. They basically said, even though we're doing all this work, every place we go to, we're being asked the same questions, and these state actors or these state departments or these NGOs, they're asking us these questions and we don't understand why they don't get what we're saying. We would like someone to take our stories and write an advocacy report for us in English. So luckily I was able to come in to satisfy that need there, right? I was able to understand and speak with these ammas in Tamil, write down so many stories and record everything that I had heard from ammas all across the Philippines, from all the different textbooks, and summarize that into an advocacy report, right? And that report hopefully is going to be useful, or is useful for them when they go into these spaces where their story, the way that they may have been seeing those stories, they may have felt that their stories weren't being heard, and this report might help with that. But at the end of the day, even that kind of work is only effective because it takes root in those stories from community, right? That type of work isn't possible unless we have stories coming from actual community members who have gone through this, right? And when it comes to community documentation, I also see it taking a lot of different forms. So I alluded to earlier the fact that, like, when I felt that UN reports weren't really getting to the point that I wanted to get to, I went to YouTube. I went to Tamil news outlets, and I started watching videos and recordings of people actually speaking at these protests to get an answer to that. Our community here and in other diasporas and in Vietnam have been doing these documentation efforts for a long time. Again, they might not call it documentation, you might not understand it in the same way that a big NGO might say what documentation is, but all of those things still matter, right? The videos matter, the books matter, the movies matter, the songs matter, the stories that we share with each other when we just speak at a protest, those things matter. And because of the way our community has grown over the last few years, those stories come to light in a lot of different ways. really, really important for us, no matter what capacity we're in, right? Whether we are activists doing work in community, whether we're legal practitioners, whether we're media folks, artists, whatever field you're in, I think it's important to recognize that documentation has taken so many different forms, and they all come from our community, right? And these are stories that are very difficult to talk about. They're hard to share for a lot of us. I'm sure once people also read this book and get to see the images and the stories of it, while it may not be deeply new for many of us, they're still harrowing, heartbreaking stories, right? They're very difficult to talk about. They are difficult to process, and this is something our community has been contending with for a very long time, right? This has been a genocide for decades and decades. So, holding that in mind, I believe that community documentation efforts are the only way that we can hold space for that, right? The fact that these are difficult stories to share and difficult conversations to have, but then being able to take that information and actually do this kind of work with care, right? Because very often, again, the non-Tamil organizations and the NGOs and the UNs of the world aren't from the community, right? They're not speaking on behalf of us, right? They might bring up certain things, and I'm definitely not undercutting the importance of that type of work. But at the end of the day, they're not going to be able to speak about our struggle in the same way that people from our community can speak about it, and people from our community have been speaking about it, right? And they don't, again, have that consideration for the pain that our people have gone through. So I've gained a particular appreciation for the work that comes from Tamil people, both in them and around the world. And I am very early in my career, and haven't done nearly as much work as many of the people in this room and many of the people in the diaspora. But I am constantly grateful that for people like me, and people who are younger than me, there are so many sources that have documented the Tamil struggle in a lot of different mediums, in different languages, and different formats. And that people are looking to this as something that's really important, right? For many reasons. To preserve our history, for legal prosecutions that may happen in the future, and to make sure that we have a record that stands against what the Sri Lankan government may try to say about what happened or their role in it, right? We as a community here around the world and in Bhutan, there are many people there to disrupt that narrative. We are here to set the record straight about what happened, and what happened was a genocide against the Tamil people, right? So, given that, I think it's important to continue remembering the work that a lot of activists do and the many different forms that it takes. And yeah, no matter what field or what type of work that you do, to remember that there's people in the community that are doing it, and we all play our own role in elevating those voices in some way and carrying these stories forward for us for future generations. Thank you so much, and yeah, I'm looking forward to this book and these stories having a bigger reach in our community. Thank you.
நன்றி சரிதா. நான் ஏற்கனவே குறிப்பிட்டது போல ஆங்கிலத்திலே இந்த விடயங்கள் பேசப்பட வேண்டும், எழுதப்பட வேண்டும் என்பதனுடைய ஆரம்பம்தான் இன்றைய முதலாவது உரை. இது குறித்து பல்வேறு வகையான செயற்பாடுகளிலே தேடல்களிலே ஈடுபட்டுக் கொண்டிருக்கின்ற ஒருவர், ஒரு சட்டத்தரணி ஒருவர் ஆங்கிலத்திலே உரையாற்ற வேண்டும் என்ற விருப்பம். சரிகாவை கேட்டிருந்தோம், பாட வேண்டாம், உரை பேசுங்கள் என்று சொல்லிட்டு பேசினார். நன்றி சரிகா. நான் ஏற்கனவே குறிப்பிட்டது போல 4 உரையாளர்கள் மாத்திரம்தான், 2 உரையாளர்கள், அதன் பின்னர் புத்தக வெளியீடு, இன்னும் 2 உரையாளர்கள். இந்த டாக்குமெண்டேஷன், அதாவது பதிவு செய்தல் என்ற பக்கத்தில் இருந்துதான் அடுத்த உரையாளரும் அமைய போகிறார். பல்வேறு சமூக செயற்பாட்டின் ஊடாக தமிழர் மத்தியிலே அறிமுகமான ஒருவர், குறிப்பாக திரைப்படம் ஊடாக தமிழர்களுக்கான போராட்டம், தமிழர்களுக்கான நில உரிமை, தமிழர்களுடைய இனப்படுகொலை உட்பட தமிழர்களுடைய கடந்த கால இந்த கால நிலை குறித்து தொடர்ந்தும் தனது திரைமொழி ஊடாக பேசி வருகின்ற ஒருவர். அடுத்த பேச்சாளர் அவர்தான் உங்கள் அனைவருக்கும் அறிமுகமான ரஞ்சித் ஜோசப். தொடர்ந்தும் இந்த திரைமொழி ஊடாகவும் இலக்கியம் இலக்கணம் ஊடாகவும் இந்த பதிவுகள் செய்யப்படுவதன் அவசியம் என்ன என்பது குறித்து பேச இருக்கிறார். திரைப்பட இயக்குனர் ரஞ்சித் ஜோசப்பை அன்போடு அழைக்கிறேன்.